Hello and welcome to the Lively Faith Podcast. I'm your host, the Reverend Nathan Stomberg, and we've got a very special episode for you today. We're going to be interviewing our producer extraordinaire, Josh Fenton, producer for the #1 podcast in the world. I thought it would be really interesting for us to get to know you a little bit better. I know you work very hard behind the scenes to make everything happen, but you're a really deep thinker and you've got some really cool prior podcast experience, and I think you offer a really unique perspective that'll be interesting for us to hear. Before we go any further, I do want to start with some quick housekeeping. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and also I'm excited to announce the Lively Faith magazine. It is a theological magazine, a devotional magazine released seasonally for Christians of different denominations that leans on the beauty of the common prayer tradition to show us how church teaching instructs us to live out our faith at the intersection of culture. It is a beautiful publication, one that we're really proud of, and is entirely free. So if you're interested in receiving a copy, haven't signed up already, please visit us at livelyfaithministries.org to sign up for our mailing list. We would love to send you a copy, and hopefully you find it as enriching to read as we found to put it together. All right, thanks for bearing with me, Josh. Now we're ready to jump right into it. So I don't really have a title for this podcast. I know sometimes I've got a title or overarching theme, but you will notice, and our listeners and viewers will notice, no Mark today. Unfortunately, Mark can't make it. We finally cancel him. But in all seriousness, I think it'll be cool to have a conversation between the two of us. Young millennials solving the world's problems is really the theme for us today. So why don't you start off, Josh? Can you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So here's the thing. I feel like I'm not very interesting. But people that talk to me say I'm very interesting. And like you said, think I'm a pretty deep thinker. So what do you think would be valuable for me to tell the audience, since you know me pretty well?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because in preparing for this episode, I texted you a little bit and I texted Mark. And what I really wanted to do was, through this episode, share a perspective from our generation, younger millennials, that perhaps older generations wouldn't be aware of. So Gen X, boomers, etc. When we first started, we got a really good response early on at the intergenerational conversation between myself, between Corey and Mark, and really highlighting the differences there. So I think, especially for you as someone, as the viewers may or may not know, you're not a confessional Christian in the same way that Mark and I are. So I think your perspective as someone who isn't a priest and isn't soaking in and marinating in Christian tradition your entire life has a really unique and interesting viewpoint as to the work that we've been doing. But also your background, I know you're pretty savvy with finance. You're pretty savvy with, obviously, YouTube editing and production, and I know you've run a couple channels yourself there, so I think those would be some really interesting angles to take there.
Yeah, I guess like you said, I've run a couple of YouTube channels. I ran one on personal finance. I kind of ran one for a while on self-development, personal development. I mean, I kind of just think I have a very level head. I feel like I look at things very rationally. I know, like you mentioned, you guys take more of a Christian point of view. I feel like I take more of like a science point of view. I like to look at things in terms of like statistics and probability and work through things that way, as opposed to the overarching gospel. That's not to say religion doesn't have its place in the world by any means at all, because I believe it does. And I think whatever gives someone purpose and meaning is extremely valuable and important. And I think that can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. But yeah, like you said, I feel like, or like I said, I feel like I just have a pretty good understanding of the world. And I feel like maybe I can just provide a little bit of a different viewpoint than what's normally talked about.
Well, one of the things that I want to go back to, because you mentioned like you don't find yourself particularly interesting, but I think if we were to extract or rule out from that, it would probably be that's the case in general, right? If you run into someone who thinks of themselves as interesting and wants to come across as that and to let everybody know, like, hey, I'm really interesting, you should listen to me, they're going to come across as a narcissist. And so your attitude, I think, is what makes you so unique and easy to talk to, and why we have such a great time working with you on the podcast is you're not totally full of yourself, which is what makes it much easier to have a conversation with you and to hear your perspective on things. But we're going to get into that a little bit deeper, but I would also like to hear, so we, just to give everyone some background, right? We went to high school together, and I think you graduated a year after me, right?
Year after, yeah.
So would you be interested in sharing a little bit of your background as far as, what you do for work, what your interests are, things like that?
Yeah, I can give a high level rundown of that. So, I mean, went to high school with Nathan, like you said, a year behind him, played basketball, very big sports guy. I feel like sports can teach a lot in terms of not only discipline, but I feel like it can teach a lot in terms of self-development as well if it's looked at the right way. I currently work as a data analyst, so I feel like that provides a lot of value in kind of just analyzing whatever and making things simple. And other than that, I just feel like I read a lot. I feel like a lot of the content I consume is not the normal millennial content. Like you said, I feel like it's a lot of content that revolves around very deep thinking, and really the concept of recursion, I think, is very near and dear to my heart, and just making problems extremely simple.
Okay.
I feel like if someone, I feel like politicians are a very good example here. Politicians aren't going to give you a very simple problem. They're not going to break things down in very simple terminology. I feel like what they're going to do is throw a bunch of large words at you to make themselves sound really smart, and they're going to say it very confidently. So they sound like they know what they're talking about, but a lot of times maybe they don't. So if you have to say big words with a lot of letters, you probably don't have that big of a brain. Or because if you really wanted kind of humanity behind you, you would just use simple terms so everyone could understand you and the people or everyone could follow you.
I think that's a pet peeve you, myself, and Mark share, is a distaste for people, well, public figures especially, who like to hide behind using many words to communicate something when a few words and a simple truth will do the trick. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. And especially for politicians, right? You present a problem that's really complicated, and but you offer, in that case, offer solutions that are overly simple. So you're not explaining things in a simple way, but you're using shortcuts and political slogans in order to overly simplify and win people over to your position. But you mentioned that you really like to read. What are you reading right now?
So right now I'm reading a couple different books. I read multiple books at once. I kind of think the best book that you can read is whatever one you're willing to read. It's kind of like the best workout to do is whatever one you're going to do. If you don't like to run, lift weights. If you don't like lifting weights, maybe try jujitsu. If you don't like jujitsu, maybe try walking. If you don't like walking, maybe try rowing. I feel like exercise has such great benefits, and any pathway you can take in the form of exercise is going to be beneficial. And I feel that way with reading as well. Whatever book that you can get yourself to read, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, whether it's fantasy, whether it's science, it's just going to help you cognitively overall, and just help you build a better picture of the world. And I feel like reading slowly, really taking your time with books, is something that I think is one of the best habits people can get into. Because if you take your time to read a book, and you really take your time to have a conversation with the author and understand what the author's actually saying, then you can probably do the same thing in conversation. Yeah. And if you can develop that confidence just from looking at a book, you can probably develop that confidence in front of other people as well. And then you'll be able to develop and create yourself into being a deep thinker in the real world, in actual reality, not just behind a book.
Do you take notes when you read?
So actually, yes and no. I do if something's very, very, very important. I will actually write it down so I can remember it, or try to remember it as best I can. But What I've done recently, and this has been very, very helpful to me, and I think anyone who wants to remember more of what they read should at least consider doing this, was I read on a Kindle.
Yep.
I think it's very convenient to have multiple books just at my disposal, whatever, especially if maybe I'm on a plane. That's one of my favorite things to do on a plane is read. So maybe I'm reading one book for half the flight and I'll just flip to another one for half the flight. I have a connecting flight. I'll flip to a third one. But what I do to actually answer your question is obviously on Kindle, you can just highlight whatever you want. And there's this thing called Readwise, which basically just takes all of the things that you highlight from that book and it basically puts it in some sort of cloud platform. And what they'll do is everything you highlight, they'll just send you those highlights in your email inbox on a daily basis. So of
That's
every
really cool.
book I've read, which is a lot, I just get those highlights sent back into my inbox every single day, which I think is very valuable because I think, and I've been very guilty of this too, as human beings, I feel like we think we'll remember everything.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you how many times I've been in a class or I'll read something or I'll watch something and I'll be like, I got it. That's it. Like, I just need to see this once. I do this a lot in jujitsu. I'll see the move once and I'll be like, oh, I got it. And then I'll try to start doing
Yeah.
the technique. And it's like literally just in one ear and out the other. But the thing is, we forget how much we actually forget. And it makes sense why
Yeah.
we forget that we forget those things. Because if we didn't forget that we forgot those things, then we wouldn't forget everything. A lot of people are probably going to want to pause and play that back because there was a lot of
maybe
forgets
play
in
that
there.
back once more. We
Yeah.
definitely overestimate our ability to remember things.
Yeah, so I think it's very valuable to, when you come across content that really speaks to you, to go back to it every now and then. I feel like it's very important to just go back through it because you forget it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Maybe a quote, maybe it's a book, maybe it's a passage. I think it's all very valuable.
Yeah. I got to say, I am a bit old fashioned. I am partial to physical paper books. But for similar reasons, I really like, especially if I'm reading something that is particularly deep or I want to remember, I love just going in and marking up the pages as I'm reading, circling and highlighting, writing notes in the margins. I do got to say that the functionality of that app to like centralize all of your notes is really cool. But as for me, to your point, I find myself, if I've gone through a book like that, I've got a couple on my bookshelf that I go back to. And if I'm writing an article or a piece or something else, I will go back and I'll think like, oh yes, I read something about this in that book. I open up the book and go back to my notes, and it's really enriching, really edifying. What's the last book that you've read?
The last book I finished was called Randomness by Nassim Taleb. And it's basically a book about statistics and probability and about how everything in the universe is completely random and doesn't make sense.
Interesting. So that's probably, I would imagine, that someone who writes from not a Christian worldview, right? It's probably more like scientific, and he's analyzing things from a materialist perspective, like looking at odds and chances of things coming into being, or
Kinda,
probabilities of life events.
That's what I thought the book was going to be about. The book was kind of just more of a rant. I wasn't a really big fan of it.
Okay.
But I do enjoy things of that nature that you named, like kind of science, probability,
Yeah.
like how things can come to term, how things are random, how things came to be, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that's really interesting, just to go off on a tangent there, when you talk about, or when theologians and scientists engage in the debate about intelligent design, there's really two big camps. Someone like the Richard Dawkins camp, for example, who we've talked about in previous episodes, who would argue from a materialist, Darwinist, evolutionary point of view that the universe came out of nothing and that it was pure chance which led to the creation of the universe and of matter and of the biological processes which gave forth life. Now, on the other hand, the intelligent design camp, which is based in a Christian worldview, and essentially argues that you must have had a creator, some higher form of intelligence that designed science and creation because of the witness of the complexity of everything that's taking place, those two different worldviews clash. But the error that is asserted on the part of the intelligent design side against materialists is that you say, well, chance created the universe. But the error there is that chance isn't a thing. Chance is a description of probability. So really what you're saying is that the universe came about randomly, and there was like a 1 in however many 100 quadrillion chance of the conditions coming about that bring forth life. But that chance is just a probability. Probability doesn't have substance or matter or being in and of itself. So it actually doesn't answer the question as to what was your first cause, what was your unmoved mover, to use a philosophical point of view. Whereas from an intelligent design perspective, not even specific to, say, Christianity, is actually the minute possibility, the infinitesimally small chance that life itself would arise the way it is, gives more credence to the idea that there probably was an intelligent designer that set the parameters, so to speak, or created life and matter and being as we know it as a creative act. So that's, if you're wondering what comes to mind when you mentioned the title of the book that you just mentioned, like that is, I think, something that some of our audience would be familiar with. But I think that is probably a much more interesting philosophical debate than whatever the rant is that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of pinpoint a little bit of what you just said, I feel like in general, there's very little human beings actually understand about the universe, like in the grand scheme of things. Yeah. Like, I think, first off, going back 100,000 years when we were just hunter-gatherers, we have no idea what caused the cognitive revolution. So we don't even know how humans really progressed to get to where we are in this day and age, in the grand scheme of things. Never mind the universe itself. Yeah. Like, let's forget that and go back billions of years and forget the dinosaurs and that whole time period. Just the human civilization itself, we have so many unanswered questions about. Maybe someone in the comments has that answer. But at the end of the day, there's a lot about the universe that is completely random. We don't know how humans got here. We don't know really what causes consciousness. We don't know about how life was created. There's many, many questions of the past, and I think there's many questions of the future as well.
I do want to, not to extend this into a debate, but something to leave with you and to leave with our listeners who may also be working through these questions for themselves is, when you say we don't know, are you saying, I assume you're asserting we don't know from a scientific standpoint.
Right.
And so where the gap gets met is from a Christian worldview, it's asserted that while we may never be able to know from a scientific standpoint, there is an aspect of faith involved because we may not ever be able to know. But human beings have always been asking these questions, and it's important for us to understand what those answers are. And so the answer, at least that I've been convinced by the light of reason, is the answers that are put forth in Scripture as far as the evidence for intelligent design and the answer provided by God as a good creator and intelligent designer of the universe. So I think that's just something for the listeners and viewers I want to clarify, is that I think I would agree that definitive answers may not exist from a scientific standpoint. However, they've improved over time and we've gained degrees of confidence, but science and the answers of science are always going to change. But the truth that is revealed in Scripture, again, which is affirmed from a position of faith, obviously, is unchanging and always provides those answers that we're searching for.
I think that's a good point. I'm not married to any of my ideas. I don't throw anything out the window. I think listening to everyone's take is important, whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it. I think as long as you have good judgment, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But I think that is one answer, one solution, one viewpoint, and I respect it, and I 100% see what you mean.
So yeah, just something to consider. It's not my it's not my goal today to try and argue you into any one position, but I think this is really where the interesting conversational dynamic comes in. And it's really interesting to hear someone's perspective from the other side of the coin. Now, I do want to switch topics here for a few minutes. You mentioned your YouTube channels, and I think that plays a big part into how we reconnected for this channel. I know you were looking for, well, not to get into the details of it, right, but you were looking for an outlet to use your creativity as far as the YouTube space goes. I think you mentioned community service at the time, and so we reconnected. Originally, you were making shorts for our church, and then the Lively Faith podcast took off, and it seemed like a really good fit to create shorts and produce shows for this channel. But you had you had one earlier YouTube channel followed by another pretty interesting YouTube channel. Would you be able to elaborate on some of that work that you've done online in the past?
So the first channel I ran, it started off as being primarily finance. I really had a passion for personal finance when I was in my early 20s, and I still think it's very important. I just don't think I have as much of a passion for it in terms of stock picking as I once did. And I kind of always felt like I was eventually going to get sick of it and I was going to grow up. I don't want to say grow up isn't the right way to phrase that.
Well, what drew you to it initially? Finance?
Just money in general. I think that's just something in my genetics. I think I got that from my mom's side of things. She's very, very money driven. And I think that's kind of where, mean is green, green is mean. I think I was just very attracted to that as I was growing up because that was just so instilled in my household, just the concept of money and making more money. So, and I found the stock market and I was fascinated by it. I read a book by Tony Robbins and it kind of put a lot of investing into my mind, and it really showed me what's possible by just investing little amounts of money over time. I read other books like The Little Book of Common Sense Investing. I read books on Vanguard. I just kind of read a lot of books and really followed my curiosity. And a lot of that revolved around money and making money in the stock market, and, started making videos on it. I had a friend at the time who was very big into making YouTube videos and made a really strong career out of it for a very long time, and did that for a while. Really enjoyed it for a very long time. Kind of tried to change gears a little bit. Tried to also sprinkle in some self-development stuff. I tried to sprinkle in some maybe challenge type videos. I made one video about solving a Rubik's Cube in a minute, just to put into perspective what I mean by challenge. So kind of basic.
You had another one about learning Spanish, right? That was kind of a fun video.
That was one I did try to do. I did try to learn Spanish in a week. Definitely more than a week to learn Spanish. I did find that out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of just got tired of it. I think I kind of burned myself out a little bit. I think I definitely done that with a lot of aspects of my life. I think I just kind of go to the wall for a good amount of time and I just burned myself out, and I need to kind of recoup and do something else. So that is one thing I learned from doing that first channel is I need to kind of take a step back, not do everything myself, accept help, hire people if I want to do that, and just not burn myself into the ground.
That's so important, right? And so many of us have been there. I've, especially like with Lively Faith as a project, I've wanted to be very intentional about making sure it's sustainable. So while I wish and I pray that we'll be able to increase our output, God willing, by working with more great people like you to help me out, I know that doing more than what we do as far as a seasonal magazine and episodes on a monthly basis, that I would end up burning myself out. And I also don't hold on to these things too tightly. So I recognize that life events are going to happen, and those things are going to change the circumstances around which we produce the show and the resources that we offer. But I'm hopeful and I'm prayerful that by always making sure that these efforts stay maintainable and sustainable, that Lively Faith will be able to produce quality content in some capacity. Because it doesn't do anything good, to your point, if we work ourselves into the ground and then you burn out and you no longer either are able to do the things that you love, or you lose your passion and your affection for the thing that you loved in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely need to enjoy the day to day. I mean, Cal Newport has a great book that I haven't read, but I've heard him talk a lot about slow productivity, which is just kind of take your time, enjoy the ride, because you're probably going to get there and realize you worked so hard for so long and the payoff isn't as great as you thought it would be. You're kind of going to be like, this is it.
Yeah.
I remember, Brett Favre has this great interview from when he won the Super Bowl. Everyone's up on the podium. Everyone's celebrating. He's kind of standing there like, this is it. This is like what I've worked my entire life for. And what he says in the interview is, it's not so much the payoff. It's not so much the reward. It's the journey.
Yeah.
It's the journey of getting there. It's the grind. It's the relationships. It's how you do it. It's the day to day, and longevity is important. Everyone talks about Warren Buffett and how he's done it for so long. It's the longevity, you know. Obviously his net worth is more than most humans will be able to achieve in their lifetime, but he was able to do that because of longevity, and he was able to do it for such a long period of time.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It reminds me of something that Jordan Peterson and kind of those in his circles like to reiterate, and that's like from a human psychological standpoint, there is an equal or greater payoff in the grind, in the progression toward a goal, as there is to achieving the goal itself, which is really just a reworking of what you just said, right? You get to the top of the mountain, you achieve your goal, you get a hit of dopamine, and you get that payoff for solving the problem. But if you don't have something that you're continually progressing toward and working toward, that's when you end up feeling directionless, you feel lost or unmotivated, and that's something that, and we'll get into in greater detail later on in this conversation. Affecting young men, it's a problem affecting young men where they feel directionless or lost. And from the Jordan Peterson point of view, it's, well, you got to do something to give your life purpose and meaning. And that purpose and meaning isn't accumulating the stuff or achieving the thing, while that may be part of it. Psychologically speaking, we're driven by progress toward a goal. And that is, from the Christian point of view, perfectly reflected in the life of faith, where God gives us an ultimate goal for us to strive for in this life and in the next, which is God himself. God is the perfect embodiment of all that is good, true, and beautiful, the embodiment of love. And so while it's a standard that while in this life we will never perfectly achieve, we can always, in Christ, make steps in faith to move toward that goal. And so you get not only the satisfaction of moving toward a goal by stepping out in faith and struggling every day to grow in holiness, but we have the guarantee that in the next life, in the beatific vision as it's called, that we're not going to be bored in heaven. We're going to be continuing that journey of love, moving closer and closer and closer to God. So even in heaven, according to the Christian worldview, it's not like stepping up onto the podium during the Super Bowl and saying, I made it, you achieved it, and then, oh my gosh, is this it? That's never a possibility, because God himself is limitless. And so you can never exhaust the possibilities and the extent of his love and his perfection, because not only in this life, but even in heaven, we, by faith, can continue to move closer and closer to him in love. And so that's really where the problem gets identified by some of the popular commentators that we see, but it is fully answered from our point of view by the Christian worldview and the Christian faith.
Robert Sapolsky has this great quote, and I'm going to kind of butcher it a little bit, so don't fact check me here.
Yeah, don't
But,
worry about it.
but it revolves.
Leave a comment.
It's something around dopamine is not in the happiness of the reward. It's in the happiness of pursuit. And if you look around, it's everywhere. Like Brett Favre winning the Super Bowl,
Yeah.
the dopamine was in pursuing that ring. People graduating college, the dopamine is going from class to class, semester to semester, test to test, essay to essay, kind of just going on that journey, your career, your life. As human beings, like you said, we just want more. And we're always going to want more. If you win an NBA championship, let's get two. If you win two, let's get three.
Yeah.
It's,
Look at Tom Brady.
yeah, enough will never be enough. There's a quote, enough is never enough for the man who thinks enough is too little. And I think that applies not just to men based off the quote, but I think people in general. I think people are always going to want more. And I think people, unless they develop the awareness that enough is enough, they're always going to think they need more.
That's a really great point. I think that sums it up really well. Maybe we put a pin in that there. I do want to get more of your thoughts on finances. So you ran a finance-related YouTube channel. What do you think about the current trends in sports betting and retail investing, like Robinhood app, things like that?
I mean, I wouldn't consider sports betting an investment. I think I've always looked at sports betting as something where you can make money, but you can also lose a lot of money. I don't know. I think sports betting is cool. It's fun. I think you can do it with friends. You can do it to kind of add a little more dopamine to watching the game. I don't think anyone should ever bet in 5 figures, 6 figures on a game unless
No way.
maybe you're Michael Jordan and you just have that money to blow. But I feel like that's too much dopamine, especially if you say you bet 6 figures your first time and you win. That's a big
that's
problem.
even worse.
That's a big problem. Like, I've never really had a really strong drive towards gambling in general. I've always looked at it as, well, I could lose money, and it goes back to statistics and probability. Well, there's a 50-50 chance that I could lose money every time in theory. And that's just too much of a risk for me to take. In terms of like Robinhood and investing, I think Robinhood, honestly, I'm a pretty big supporter of, because I think it makes investing accessible to everyone.
Oh, sure.
And I think it makes investing simple. And, Steve Jobs is a big fan of keeping things simple. He had this thing called the simple stick where he would just hit people with, quote unquote, where if things were too complex, it wasn't worth it. Like, the product, the idea will not sell to someone if the idea and the product is too complex and they can't understand it. It needs to be as simple as possible. And I 100% agree. And that kind of goes back to that whole recursion aspect we talked about earlier. But, do I think Robinhood is the best investing platform and Robinhood is the best type of investing you can do? Is that the best way you can invest? No, absolutely not. But if you're 16, 17, 18, 20, even older than that, and you've never invested and the concept of Vanguard is just too complex, I think Robinhood's a very simple platform that can help a lot of people. I mean, I started investing on Robinhood when I had no idea what I was doing. And, that just led me to following my curiosity to better investing platforms over time.
I think that's a great point. I think you're also the exception in that regard. Let me explain.
Possible,
yes. I think like the vast exception. Let me explain to you where I'm coming from. And I won't waste too much time on this because we've done an earlier episode on this, I think earlier back in 2023, about retail investing and gambling and sports betting. So, the morality against that from the Christian point of view is well established. But I think even more recently, the gamification of those things is what concerns me. So we keep hitting new highs in the amount of money gambled via sports betting each and every year. And you mentioned dopamine. I think companies are really playing on the dopamine hit that you get by pulling up an app and making it easier and easier and easier to bet even small sums of money to generate excitement while watching a football game. And while someone like yourself, right, who is very disciplined, could use that to increase his or her entertainment while watching the game. For so many other people, it just totally preys upon them because it uses the same psychology as a casino to draw people in and to reduce the barriers to throwing your money away when you could be saving that money or using it for a wise investment. And the same danger exists in the Robinhood app. I don't have the same qualms about Robinhood as I would like a sports betting app, but you look at these stories of like younger high school students who get into retail investing forums, things like Reddit, Wall Street Bets, which I admit is niche, but you end up in these situations where minors are throwing away 4 or 5 figures on trying to short like some stock because they think they're going to hit it big. And while this isn't a call for Robinhood to take the app down, it is an interesting conversation as to like what controls do you put in place, because you do from the aspect of recursion, right, want to make these things accessible to more people. But there is a line that gets crossed where now you gamify it to the extent that you're preying on vulnerable people and on young people to do very risky things with their money that is ultimately a ploy to gamble it all away. Just some food for thought.
Yeah, I think both those points were an excellent response. I think you're right. Maybe I was the exception to the rule. Like in terms of Robinhood, I definitely, like I read those investing books we talked about earlier before I started throwing money on Robinhood. So I kind of already had like my foot in the door more or less. But if I had of maybe 15-year-old Josh stumbled upon a Wall Street Reddit post about GameStop going to the moon or Dogecoin, yeah, maybe I would have fallen into that same trap. That's very possible, and that's very wise. In terms of sports betting, I think that's an even better point, because the thing about investing correctly, if you're investing long term, unless you're doing short term trading, it's going to take a little while to make money. You know, Warren Buffett didn't make his fortune overnight, and that goes back to the concept of longevity and being able to do things for a very long period of time. Sports betting, you can double, triple, 3x,
yeah,
4x your money in a couple of hours.
Yeah, it's tempting.
Which isn't super realistic for the average investment at all.
Right.
So
it's not real life.
Yeah. I think both those were great points. I mean, the sports betting one, I think I agree with way, way more. The Robinhood one, it's kind of like doomed if you do, doomed if you don't, I think. Because
it's difficult. You're better off from a societal standpoint raising your kids in such a way that you can either you protect them from having access to like smartphones and those apps like as a parent, or B, you give them the common sense to be able to make wiser decisions with their money.
Yeah, I guess in a perfect world, we would all have slight investing knowledge, so we wouldn't just throw money away in Robinhood. But yeah, I mean, do you restrict people from investing, or do you not restrict people and kind of limit them? I mean, in a case like me, that would hurt me because I had the knowledge. But in a case like Wall Street Bets, GameStop, Dogecoin, sure, a lot of people would have saved a good amount of money.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a new problem either, right? It's just, it's taking different forms, but it is so important to be informed about these things as they happen. That way you don't get sucked into the hysteria and the mania of trying to make money from the next big craze, because the next thing is always going to come along and the danger is going to be the same. So why don't we switch gears then? We talked about finance. Let's talk about, I forget the word that you used. It was like self-improvement. This was the latest channel that you started on YouTube. I think you call it Wise Insights, right?
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about what drew you toward the self-improvement realm after you moved on from doing finance stuff?
So one thing I kind of thought about myself is I'm not really anything special. I feel like a lot of the problems I have and a lot of the things I struggle with on a day-to-day basis and a lot of the things that run through my mind are something that a lot of people struggle with, and a lot of people have those same thoughts running through their head. So the whole point of the channel was to make it a faceless YouTube channel, just kind of outsource everything, come up with the idea and outline, hire a scriptwriter, hire someone to create the videos, hire someone to do a voiceover, and just put the whole thing together, kind of like a puzzle. And the whole point of the channel was to just grow it and get it into as many people's hands as possible and just see how many people could relate to it, because there's lots of things that I've gone through that other people have gone through. I feel like, especially as like young men, people just don't talk about it.
What are some things related to young men that really hit close to your heart? That's a big question.
There's a lot of directions I could go with this, man. I feel like navigating your emotions. I think that's probably one very, very big one. I think what is being a man in this day and age, I mean, if you look at it, society has changed a lot in the last 100 years with really the evolution of women entering the workforce, having a lot of rights. And I'm not a misogynist by any means, but it has really changed what men do.
Cancel you in one episode.
Might as well. One and done, baby. Let's ride. But I don't know, man. If you go back 100 years, it was like the man of the house went to work, supported the family, and the woman went home and stayed home and took care of the family. And, this is kind of the first generation where that's kind of changing. And I feel like it's really feeling the effect of that, because, a lot of women make more than men in a relationship now. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I think that's actually awesome in a way, but, women have really fought for everything they've wanted. And, in a lot of ways they've gotten it and they continue to get it. But I also think men haven't adapted to that just yet, and they don't know how they fit into society, where it's like in a stereotypical heterosexual relationship, when a woman doesn't need the man to support them and they don't need a man to have kids, I mean, what's the point of us being here?
So would you say it seems like there was a design for how the family was supposed to work, or there are standard roles, right, for how the family is
gender roles,
to work, gender roles. And we talk about this a lot on the show here, right, that there is a natural order to the family that is upheld and taught by the church and is substantiated by scripture. It goes back to the intelligent design conversation that we just had, that the gender roles, the structure and the form of the family are built into the design of creation. And that's why these things also exist on a biological level. So it's really fascinating that you hit upon it, because that's like the center of the issue from a Christian standpoint and from Christian moral theology, that where we are right now is kind of I don't want to say a tipping point, but we are just now seeing the multiplication of effects from turning or rejecting this natural design of the family. So when we talk about like men of our generation and of really the generation just preceding us, we are the first who were born into a totally post second, third wave feminism sort of world where those gender roles are no longer normative, and we are now reconstructing a society around something entirely new, whereas the idea of a husband being a father and a leader and provider of a family, not to the exclusion of the wife's flourishing or even her work in the workplace, or like it has nothing to do with one person working or not working or making more money or less money than the other person. It's totally an issue of character and integrity and expectation. A man can be the leader and the provider of a family without making a fraction as much as his wife does. But it comes back to a spiritual and an emotional leadership, where men are expected to, in this natural design of the family, to be the leader and the provider in this manner for their entire family. And when you break him out of that role, that's really where the confusion comes in and the loss comes in, because now you have men who are being told that, you're not supposed to be assertive, that, you're supposed to be more in touch with your emotions, so to speak, versus trying to emulate a picture of strength and masculinity that was standard throughout scripture and throughout time, in order to provide for your family. So, maybe a little bit rambling, but I think the short answer is, these problems that we face stem from turning God's design for the family on its head. And that's the short answer to that.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot. I don't think there was really a question in there for you. You did mention men navigating their emotions.
I did.
I'm interested in what you think about that. Like, where does that thought lead for you?
I mean, I think there's a stereotypical view going back that men don't have emotions and feelings and they can easily push those down.
Yeah.
And maybe that worked hundreds of years ago, but I don't think the human race was just as developed. Even maybe 100 years ago, it might have worked. I just don't think that was necessarily the best way to approach things by any means at all. I mean, humans feel emotions. I feel like women are going to feel emotions way more than men. If you took 1,000 women and 1,000 men who would both consider themselves anxious, across the 2,000 people, the woman would probably have way worse anxiety than the males. Like, I feel like women feel emotions way, 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 way more than males do. But that doesn't mean males don't feel their emotions at all. Men get depressed, men cry, men get anxious, men get upset. It's just kind of part of the human experience. The worst thing that could ever happen to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you, whether your house is burnt down or someone scratched your car, And I think everyone, men and women, need to navigate and deal with those emotions and process them. And, maybe there are some males out there in this day and age that really think you still need to be a quote unquote man and push down those emotions. And to that, I say, maybe that works for you, but I don't think that necessarily works for everyone. And I don't think, just because some males think that means that all males should really push down their feelings and just feel like they can deal with it on their own.
That's a really interesting perspective. I think there's a couple things in play there. I think one, a couple things in play that lead to the problem you identify. I think one is the elevation of our personal emotions in our current day and age versus where maybe they used to be considered in previous generations. So what do I mean by that? I think it comes down to moral relativism, where we now have the elevation of the self and what I feel inside as being the arbiter of truth and the most important thing, so that what I feel must be reality, and I need other people to validate how I feel in order to feel okay. And that if I'm feeling something, then it must be the end all be all. Whereas historically, and again from a Christian natural law standpoint, your feelings can often be right, but our feelings are also oftentimes wrong. And when we hold our feelings up on a pedestal, we are now really we're enslaved to those feelings, which can vary wildly from day to day and even from hour to hour and minute to minute. And so I think this is a clarifying point to what I was trying to explain earlier, which is I think the error in a society asking men to be in touch with their feelings is that it comes from a worldview of your feelings are the most important thing, and that you need to constantly reflect on and ruminate on those things in order to get a hold of them. And ultimately what that does is it just causes you to spiral and really think those things through, when in reality, if you've got a feeling that that doesn't comport with what is true, then it is good to be able to put that out of your mind and focus on the good things. Which brings me to the second point, which is like, I'm not saying that men should stuff their feelings down, because that's not helpful either, because feelings can also be a reflection of something that is true going on inside of us or in our families. But because we have destroyed the framework of what makes a healthy family life and healthy friendships, men and women, but we're talking about men here, no longer have a healthy outlet to discuss and process those feelings, because not only have we elevated feelings on a pedestal of being of ultimate importance, we've also elevated the individual. So now the atomized, separate individual as a single person unit is the most important. Like, family doesn't matter as much. Having friends outside of the workplace doesn't matter as much. What matters is, you're a widget, maximizing your own potential, maximizing your earnings, and you're going out and you're hitting the grind day after day after day. And there's no cultural consideration of, well, what about getting married? What about having kids? What about existing in the context of a family unit, which throughout all of time has been the outlet for men to talk through these things, specifically with their wives. And that's why it's so important to preserve the institution of marriage and for men to get married, is because your wife should spiritually become someone who knows you better than yourself. And so, as God has said, a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. That one flesh union is the instrument through which men and women can process these emotions and these changing tides of life without having to stuff them down, as is one false prescription, or elevate them and analyze them to no end, as is the other false prescription. So you have two problems here that I think from a Christian worldview contribute to the emotional paralysis specifically of men. So it's the elevation of emotion and then the destruction of the family structure.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. I think part of it is too just how society is wired in this day and age. I feel like human beings are just way too stimulated all the time.
Great point.
And I feel like, honestly, I think people just need more time to think.
Oh, that's such a great point. Yeah.
Like, Naval Ravikant has this great thing where he says, if you constantly are just having your attention pulled away from you, I've heard this from a couple of people, what you really need to do is just sit and think. So sometimes what I do is I will just literally sit in a chair and stare at a wall for 1 hour. And just,
you're a madman.
Dude, it's...
Do you blink? I hope you blink.
I do blink.
Okay.
There is blinking involved, but I love it.
That's nuts.
Like, I did it this morning. I absolutely love it. Like, I feel like, so picture like an alcoholic, right? Okay. Someone you would see on the side of the road, like asking for money. And so much of their attention is just being pulled away from the lack of sleep, because alcohol just blocks the ability to have REM sleep. And they start hallucinating because they haven't slept in so long. I personally feel like with too much stimulation, that happens to us as well. Not on that level. I don't think people are going to start hallucinating. But I feel like your attention is just going to be so constantly scattered, and your thoughts are going to be the equivalent to like chipping away at like ice, for example. Just like, you need to just sit and really just think and process everything. And I think that helps process your emotions as well.
You hit on something that I think is really relevant, especially to us, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, from a generational perspective, is our attention spans have been totally trashed, right? You think about like TikTok. Are you on TikTok or anything like that?
I refuse to be on TikTok.
You're a wise man. Very wise, right? Because it just totally, from a younger generational standpoint, it's like brain rot. We talk about brain rot, where you're looking at these videos that are designed to worm their way into your brain to hold your attention for as long as possible, but they're designed to give you short but maximal dopamine hits, so that they're constantly cutting, you're constantly switching from new video to new video, and now that whittles away at your brain's ability to do something like stare at a wall for an hour, but I think maybe from a more relatable perspective, like reading a book. I think that was a great example. Reading a book slowly is something, again, that you are a great exception to the rule, because our attention spans, especially in younger generations, have been so whittled down that we need to reclaim and redevelop those muscles for sitting and thinking. That's what it is. It's thinking and it's meditation. That's one of the things that I love, and I know so many of our readers and listeners and viewers love, is part of the common prayer tradition that provides a space and time at different points throughout the day to stop, to slow down, and recite these prayers of the ancient church that collect your thoughts and allow you to focus on just the moment that you're in and focus on the realities of God and what God is trying to tell you. And so I think it fulfills a similar need, a similar reflex to what you're talking about, I know I'm poking fun at you, but staring at the wall, right? But yeah, I mean, what's your take like on social media and things like that?
I think I'd like to think social media was founded with the best intentions.
Sure.
And I mean, there are a lot of good things behind it.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like 30 years ago, people would graduate high school, graduate college, and there's a good chance you probably wouldn't have heard from them again. So it is nice to kind of stay in touch with people, see people's accomplishments, see how they're doing, like close friends who maybe got married and moved away, had kids and got busy. I think it's awesome to kind of see what they're doing and, shoot them a quick text or send a message on Facebook, say, hey man, I was thinking of you, saw you got engaged.
Yeah.
I had a friend I did this with a couple weeks ago. I saw you got engaged and I was like, hey man, saw you got engaged. Congratulations. You know? So I think that's cool, just to kind of keep up with people passively. At the same time, I think it does a lot of negative things, primarily to the younger generation. Jonathan Haidt has a great book on this, The Anxious Generation.
Oh, he's great. He's a great author.
Yeah, I've listened to several podcasts from him, read a couple of his books. Happiness Hypothesis is another good one that I read a long time ago. I would like to reread that one. But it does, I think it goes a lot of it, and I think there's a lot of things I could say on it, and there's a lot of directions I could go in with it. I think it just comes back to dopamine. The constant refreshing, the constant new picture, the constant excitement. It's all highlights. So I think so much dopamine and just seeing highlights, I think it can kind of lead to a more depressive state, because it's a virtual reality. Like the reality those people live in that are posting pictures of them on vacation in Cancun and getting engaged, that's 0.1% of their life. But the thing is, why would I post a picture on Instagram of me driving into work or a picture of me sitting at the office? What attention is that going to get?
Right.
And it does create a little bit of an unhealthy game too. I got this many likes on this picture. This many people watch this video. So once you kind of get caught up in the analytics, I think, it can lead to negative thoughts, and it kind of sets that arbitrary bar for yourself. If you say you got 100 likes on a picture, that's the threshold. That's the standard. Like, now I want to get 101. Okay, you get 101. Now I want to get 110. I got 110. I want to get 120. And it's kind of like just puts you in that rabbit hole to try to do more things that you can post about. And I think that just ties you into getting caught up too much in what other people are thinking about you, because you want other people to like what you're doing rather than for you to like what you're doing.
Yeah. We've created a commodity out of human attention, haven't we? That's crazy to think about, that we've commodified it. Tell me if you've seen stuff like this before. The thing that really shocks me online is you'll see videos now. I'm not saying I watch these, but you see or hear about videos where you've got TikTok shorts or YouTube shorts where they're geared toward a younger audience. And now you're crossing the 30-second to 1 minute threshold. That's considered a long video. And to hold someone's attention during a YouTube or TikTok short which is already a short form video designed to maximize your dopamine, you've now got overlays of like mobile phone games in the corner of the screen while someone is talking about something else, because it splits the person's attention and they now get distracted by someone playing Subway Surfers or like a Candy Crush in the corner of the screen while someone is talking about a subject of interest in the background, which is only 30 seconds long. Does that make sense? So you're like literally like Josh Fenton is talking about how to improve yourself and get on a next level mindset and hitting your next level grind. But because just looking at Josh Fenton talk about something for 30 seconds is too much, now you need to stick a picture of Nathan playing Subway Surfers in the corner of the screen, or like someone chopping up onions, like really like crazy stuff, to further grab the young viewer's attention. It's totally crazy and like baseless and brain rotted that we were just talking about, but it speaks to this negative feedback loop of commodifying human attention, because by commodifying human attention, you devalue it, you ruin it, so it gets even shorter. So now you take even more extreme measures to hold on to it and you keep upping it to the next level. Have you seen anything like that before? Am I making sense?
I think I get what you're saying. So you're saying instead of watching just video on X, you have to be doing something else at the same time?
Yes, it's like that, but in a single video. It's kind of like, oh, you're sitting down to watch football on the big screen, and while you're watching football on the big screen, I'm taking my small screen, my phone, out of my pocket, and you're scrolling on X, you're scrolling on Facebook while you're watching television. It's taking that dynamic and then putting it in an individual video.
Yeah, that's what I thought you meant.
Yeah.
Like, it is kind of crazy to think about that, just like one stimulating factor is understimulating. It's really shocking and quite concerning. And I think this is why, you know, maybe overall output at work isn't super great. Yeah, it's gone down a lot.
Yeah.
Because people hit a wall in the project they're working on at work, and the next thing you know, they're on Instagram. And it's like, how did that happen? Well, it's because you hit that mental wall.
Yep.
And rather than just like sit and think through the problem, you just look for the quickest dopamine hit, the quickest thing to get reassurance from.
Totally right. This is going to be an unpopular take with my peers.
I love
Interested
it. I love it.
with what you think. Work from home, more harm than good. Like, I know work from home, like, I like it as an option. I like the flexibility. Like, I personally am able to work from home when I need to. But so, like, I think the majority of people who say, I need to work from home, I work better from home, are lying to themselves. I think that what they're saying is, like, great if your workplace gives you that flexibility, but you're not getting as much done when you work from home. Maybe some people are, but really what it allows you to do is hide behind your laptop screen, jiggle your mouse, and scroll on your phone while the people in the office are getting more work done because they're interacting face to face. What do you think about that?
I think first off, it depends on the job.
Sure.
I think first and foremost, like, if you are like a little more siloed, I think it could be more beneficial. If you're collaborating with other people, maybe it is a little bit kind of counterintuitive, because if you're constantly responding to like Slack messages or Teams messages, it is the same dopamine effect, really. Emails, same thing.
Yeah.
Like, if you are constantly checking emails, Teams, and Slack, then what's the difference between that and checking social media constantly? I mean, at the end of the day, it is very similar.
It's true. The apps are designed the same, right?
Right.
To
Exactly.
gamify it. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of working from home, I think I'm not the best person to ask, because I'm a little bit of an exception to the rule. I feel like when I have a project I really need to get done and I'm working from home, I put my phone in another room and I'll just set a timer for like 2 hours on my watch.
Smart.
And I won't do anything else until that timer goes off. So I think I'm probably not going to agree with you fully here, but I do feel like that the majority of people do fall into that social media trap that you named. Yeah. So I think it goes back to the job and the person at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I'm open to it, right? I'm not like anti work from home, but I think it's a very real temptation that collectively we are not being honest with ourselves about. When we keep saying, like, when we demonize having, like, companies making people go back into the office, I'm not like, whoa, like pro big business Nathan over here trying to advocate for yanking everybody back into the office. But there is data, it would seem, to suggest that productivity for some, if not many, goes up when you are in a different environment that is more free from distractions. And I guess, you can get distracted in the workplace too, sometimes just as easy as you can working from home. There's just something to be said, going back to natural law, about the nature of work, of like getting up from your bed and getting dressed and going somewhere to do a thing versus rolling out of bed, going into the next room and logging onto your computer. You don't have that change of environment and that change of stimulus that I would say adds a certain sense of value and importance to the work that you're doing versus just being in your house and, rolling out of bed and working on your, whatever it is that you need to do that day. So
there's a little bit more sense of purpose there, right? Getting up and kind of leaving your house rather than rolling over. I kind of think that a hybrid is probably the best schedule. Maybe in office Monday, work from home Tuesday, on Monday, have your meetings. Okay, on Wednesday or Thursday, whenever you come back in, let's meet again and talk about X project and Y project and the progress you've made and the steps for the following day. I feel like kind of systems like that would be the most beneficial, because as long as you have like clear standards and clear structures on priorities, then I think it's kind of the best of both worlds, more or less.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think hybrid is the best. Thankfully, I'm in a hybrid situation, so if you got a day full of meetings or you got to make an appointment or something, work from home, someone comes over to the apartment, you got to work from home to let the person in, like for maintenance. I think that is good. Like, don't get me wrong. I think it is good to have it as an option. And I think the hybrid scenario that you lay out is definitely ideal if it's possible. It depends on the field, like you said.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it depends. There's so much depends on that. But interesting thoughts to share there. Just thanks for listening to my rant about that.
Anytime, buddy.
So we've talked about masculinity. We've talked about finances. We've covered work from home. We've actually covered a lot of ground. And we discussed your background too. We talked about showcasing and highlighting a millennial perspective that our audience, I think, has found interesting and hopefully finds interesting, right? Finds useful and edifying. Unfortunately, Mark couldn't be with us today, but in preparing for this episode, I did discuss with him a few of the things that he would ask you
in his honor,
in his stead. And, I would agree. I think I would also be interested in hearing your answers. So I'm going to go through some of those and we'll just continue to tangent and riff on them as we have been.
Hit me.
All right.
Do it.
Ready?
Do your worst.
I know this one never comes up in our episodes, but we're going to talk about it. National debt.
Comes up behind the scenes a lot.
It comes up behind the scenes. Oh, I was being facetious too. I think it does come up a lot. We've discussed it a lot, but again, I think we've gotten a lot of our side of the coin with national debt. What do you think, as a young millennial person in your position, about the national debt, and what do you think the world will look like for us, like for me and you, in a generation, 2 generations, or a couple of decades? Like, what do you feel, just from your perspective, life is going to be like as a result of rising national debt? Or maybe the initial question is that something that you think about, or do you think that you and your peers are aware of?
So I think I am obviously aware of the national debt. I don't have super strong opinions about it because it doesn't affect my day-to-day life. And at the end of the day, I'm not paying off the entire national debt myself. Mm-hmm. So I try not to care about it. I try not to let it bother me. I try not to think about it because there's just more pertinent things in my life I feel like I need to be concerned about, as opposed to what people above me are going to do to figure this out. So I really don't think about it too much, but I'm aware of it. I understand it's a problem. I think it's a problem, especially because humanity has put such an emphasis on capitalism and money. I have someone I know who was diagnosed with cancer, and while going to treatment, he's continuing to work through his cancer diagnosis. So, obviously humanity has put money above health in a lot of ways, like, which I think is kind of insane in some ways. I don't know how it can be fixed, though. I don't have a great solution. Maybe that's just because I am not knowledgeable enough to come up with $35 trillion or $40 trillion, whatever
close,
the number
maybe
is.
20 trillion.
Yeah. But I think the scary thing is even the people above me, they don't seem to really have a great plan to figure that out either. I mean, I don't know if it's the entire economy would collapse, but I think it's the generations in the future are just going to feel it more and more. I mean, I think people are being priced out of living as is. It's very tough to buy a home as an individual now. I think the days of living a lifestyle you saw in The Simpsons where Homer Simpson could kind of work a middle class job.
Simpsons as the model family.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think the days where someone could work a middle class job and go on tons of vacations and live comfortably are over. Now I feel like people making $100,000 a year a lot of times have a side job, a lot of times need more money, more income just to live and survive. I feel like one income families are very, very rare in this day and age. And I feel like the debt's just going to make that a lot worse. Like,
I think you're spot on about that.
yeah. So I think it's a problem. I think it's interesting that it doesn't get talked about more. Again, I don't know how to fix it, but I feel like that should be something politicians should be discussing and planning for rather than.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's considered, you might have heard this before, like a third rail in American politics, a third rail being like, if you're at the T or you're down in the subway, you've got the rails that the train runs on. And then the third rail is like the electrified rail that like powers the train. And if you touch it, you immediately get electrocuted and you die. So that's the terminology, like entitlements, national debt, Social Security are the third rail of public discourse, because like you don't talk about that, because then you won't get elected, because now you're talking about cutting benefits and not shoveling free money and like tossing it out of a helicopter in order to buy votes. But a few thoughts on what you said, because I think you're very perceptive, right? I think one thing which you didn't say, but what I pick up on is you say you don't have a solution, and I don't think any one individual can solve a problem this massive. I think in a lot of ways we are unfortunately too far down the road to avert some sort of hardship in order to correct it. But on an individual level, we talk about things like sphere of influence versus sphere of concern, and your perspective, I think, is very healthy on an individual standpoint, where it's like, make yourself aware of it, but don't let it consume you and like make yourself anxious about it on a day-to-day basis, because you can only control what you can control, right? And what I've observed as your friend is very likely you're making wise personal financial decisions that will allow you to have some measure of financial independence apart from relying on like a government welfare system, because you're making smart choices with your money. Would that be accurate, right? Would you say that your goal is to achieve a certain level of financial independence?
I would say that's accurate. I mean, I think of me first, I mean, I kind of feel like, maybe you can't help the entire class, but, they say no student left behind, but I'm just trying to leave the class behind, Like at the end of the day, like I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I've always had a pretty good curiosity muscle. And I kind of feel like if I just keep following my curiosity in terms of finance and business, at the end of the day, I'll figure it out and I'll be fine, because screw what everyone else is doing. It's not my direct problem,
Sure.
So my direct problem is to figure it out for player one, aka me. So I think, is that wrong to say? Maybe not.
Well, I think you gotta start somewhere, right? And as a single person, just really your primary responsibility is to take care of yourself. And for people who are married, if you get married, or if you have kids, for people who have families, I think your sphere of concern then grows, hopefully, from just taking care of numero uno to, oh, now
Numero
I want to
dos.
provide for my wife. I want to make sure that I have money for my kids and for my grandkids to be able to provide a better life for them. So I think, you got to start somewhere, right? My perspective on it, again, Christian, Anglican priest, but in someone same generation as you, I would agree it doesn't do anyone any good to go around being anxious about large political problems that are outside of your control. But in the spirit of being informed, I think you touch upon really what is the prevailing attitude, which is like, it doesn't affect me here and now, so I'm not going to worry about it. But the nature of, I would say, the national debt problem, and from a Christian moral worldview, is that it is deferring a problem to future generations that's going to get larger and larger until eventually it comes to a head. And that, from a Christian moral standpoint, is tremendously irresponsible, because what you're now saying is, I'm going to rob from future generations. And I'm not attributing this to you personally, you know that, but like in a general perspective, our generations are borrowing from future generations in order to prop up this bubble that allows us to live comfortably right now. And that is the dynamic you're talking about, where middle-class families and lifestyles are being cornered out of a high standard of living. You can't have the Homer Simpson lifestyle because we keep borrowing money to inflate our currency to keep up on interest payments to the debt and to keep up on growing costs to a welfare state, where eventually one of two things is going to come to a head. Either you're going to borrow too much from your own currency and interest rates on the debt are going to be too high, and you can no longer print money without devaluing your currency or being unable to, say, fund for national defense. And now you're unable to fight a major war, and you're unprepared, and you end up losing that war. Or you're unable to respond to a financial crisis because you've inflated the crap out of your currency, and now you're unable to manage the fluctuations in the inflation rate, or to provide subsidies to, say, like failing businesses or institutions. So the next, by putting off the solving the problem right now, which on a simple level is just figuring out how to spend less than you make, you are increasing the size of the future problem, which may or may not happen in our lifetimes, which is one of a few things. Either you're unprepared to fight a war because you don't have the money to print or to take out in order to fund it, or you no longer have enough money to pay for the social security benefits of the older generations, which now outnumber the younger generations. And then you're into forced austerity measures, which basically means we have to cut benefits to the elderly and to the poor because we can no longer afford to pay them. And so that's where I'm coming from, is what should we worry about as a younger generation is like, yeah, okay, so you vote for the politicians that you think might solve the problem. Realistically speaking, I'm not sure any politicians are willing to solve the problem. So then you're looking out for numero uno, right? So then it comes down to, what responsible financial decisions can I make as a husband, or as someone, as a father, or again as an individual, to make sure that I don't have too much debt, I have a steady income, I have savings, and I'm living a lifestyle that can weather the storms of life, and potentially big storms that will eventually come when it's time to pay the piper. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I 100% get what you're saying. It is being handled pretty responsibly. Like, if you have any friends that are in credit card debt, you probably don't tell them to go open up another credit card. It's probably not the most responsible thing to do. But I think one thing that's very clear is, fundamental human principles you'll see all the way up from people on welfare all the way to the top. And I think the fundamental principle we're just seeing from the humans at the top is avoidance. And we talked about this before we started recording. I don't remember what it was in regards to, but humans naturally avoid big problems. And I think that's just what's going on here. They're just avoiding the overarching problem, the elephant in the room. And they are, like you said, just kicking the can down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good, succinct way of describing it. Which brings us to our second question here, somewhat related, rising national debt, but also falling birth rate. So from your position, again, people of our generation, what do you think about the falling birth rate? And in this country in particular, but more so across the West, what are your thoughts about the falling birth rate, and what do you think our lives will look like in the future as a result of that? And again, is that something that you even think about on your radar?
So this one I do have a little bit more of an opinion on. So in terms of falling birth rate, I am really not surprised by any means, because one, I think the human race is just going to be extinct eventually. So therefore, I think falling birth rates just kind of comes with that. But from a more, I guess, in-depth perspective, I think it goes back to women taking a bigger part in the workforce, first of all. I mean, when more and more women want to focus on their career and have a career before they have kids, you're going to just wait until later in your life to have kids, because it's a little bit more difficult to get a career kind of off the ground if you're also raising a family. I mean, I think that goes with anything, really. Like, you know, I think that's just kind of how it is. But a big thing is it's just expensive to live, man. That's what it comes down to. I think it's just really, really expensive to live. And I've said this multiple times. The number of kids I will have is capped by how much I can afford. I don't want to bring a kid into this world if their life's gonna be compromised and they can't live a safe, I don't want to say luxurious lifestyle, but if they can't live a comfortable lifestyle, you know, I don't want to have kids and live on the street or be worried about losing the house or anything like that. So, I mean, that kind of summarizes my take on that right there in a nutshell.
Well, I think your response to that is largely similar. I would say it's representative of a lot of people our age. I would strongly agree, at least the second part, right, about the affordability is very representative. I think the first part, what you said, is very perceptive. So I would strongly agree with that the change in family dynamic, you know, we talked a lot earlier on about turning the natural family structure on its head, has resulted, among other things, in the declining birth rate, because now career for many people is being prioritized over starting a family. And that's not always for bad reasons. I think many people have good intentions with that. And part of that is the affordability aspect that you have mentioned. But what I would offer as a rebuttal to your second point about affordability, fully acknowledging that as millennials, the affordability of the middle-class lifestyle that our parents were accustomed to is much more difficult than it used to be. So I'm not denying that. But so this is a consideration not just for you, but I think generally speaking, because I think a lot of people feel the same way, is that we live, despite that reality, that the middle-class lifestyle is not what it used to be. We live in the most prosperous time in human history and in the most prosperous country that ever existed. And so while, yes, from a relative standpoint, it is harder than ever in the last however many decades to start a family in a certain area with a certain lifestyle, it is comparatively, I would say, exponentially easier to do that than it has been if you look however many hundreds or thousands of years in the past, where there, again, different societal reasons lending itself to that, but previously a much higher birth rate when there was a different emphasis on the family, a closer connection, especially in the West, to Christian moral values and to a stronger, more integrated family structure where people throughout history have figured out how to raise children in abject poverty and still have managed and to uphold having children as a good thing. Now, that's not to say that we should be irresponsible with having more children than we can take care of, so to speak, but in the interest of being open to life, especially in the context of marriage, that's not anything that's new from a family perspective. And the reality is, as a priest giving advice to Christian families, we do not live, like in the context of history, we don't have it any harder in the United States to start and raise a family than previous generations have for millennia going back. So that's another unpopular take, but it is something worth considering that, there is a mindset that has taken place where I need X, Y, and Z, or I want to be able to do X, Y, and Z for my kids, which is a good thing. But at the same time, we are allowing that good desire to supersede the even greater good, which is having kids in and of themselves. And while that's not going to be easy, none of this is saying that it's easy to take care of and to provide for those kids. It's, I think we do have our priorities out of order when it comes to what we perceive as affordability issues, when in actuality, we do have it better than generations that have come at any point before us in history.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess the most challenging time to raise a family is today, at the end of the day. Like, meaning whether it was today, tomorrow would also be the most challenging point. The next day would be the most challenging point. Like, the present moment is the most challenging point. Because it's easy to look back in history and say, well, I would have obviously figured it out then, but you probably wouldn't have by any means. Here's a good question for you. So, does the birth rate include... What does the birth rate actually include? Because technology has just come so far that women can give birth 9 out of 10 times and everything just goes according to plan. But going back in the day, it wasn't always a guaranteed thing that the child was going to live and grow up and be an adult. So does the birth rate just include a child coming into the world, or does it include like adolescence, childhood itself? Like, I guess I don't understand exactly how that's classified.
That's actually a good question. And maybe we can, I don't know if we can look it up on the computer without interrupting the stream, but from a simple perspective, it is number of... Actually, why don't we try looking it up,
Sure.
if you don't mind?
So birth rate is calculated by dividing the number of live births in a population in a year by the mid-year resident population.
Okay, so it's live births, so that means it wouldn't account for children who
die at the age of 6 months,
who would have died in early childhood, but it wouldn't count any other statistic as far as like a miscarriage, for example.
Because I read one book about, I don't know exactly who the king was, but one king tried to have like 15 kids because he really wanted a son and he kept missing. And in addition to keep missing, a lot of the kids just died in infancy.
Well, yeah, and that was a cultural factor, right? That's absolutely true, that birth rate was higher by necessity.
Right, yeah.
Because many of your children would have died at a very young age, and also having more children was necessary in order to maintain, really to survive, because you were subsistence living. You probably lived on a farm, especially like if you're talking about colonial New England, for example. So your children were the people who were going to help you take care of your farm. So it was important to have 5, 6, 7 kids, because without them, you weren't going to make any money. Heck, you wouldn't even be able to harvest enough food to be able to survive through the winter. So there are like societal factors in play, And I think like there is a nuance there, right? Like my perspective is not arguing that we should all be going out and trying to have 6, 7, 8 children. I just mean my argument is from just above replacement rate, like 2.1 children is really that is where the tipping point comes in as far as population growth versus population decline.
I think you made a good point that priorities just aren't in order either. Like it's very easy in this day and age to switch sexual partners pretty often.
Yep.
You know, I think honestly, I think kind of social media plays a big part in it too. Just like the dopamine.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think a lot of things are just easier and misaligned, and the goal of raising a family and having offspring is lost in a lot of people for a lot of different reasons.
Spot on. I think that's spot on. Anything else on that before we move to the next question?
I think I hit everything I want to talk about. I think I'm good. That's a pretty good place to leave it, I think.
Yeah. All right. So next one. This one is, I admit, is a bigger question, so we can spend some time on it. What are your thoughts about goodness, truth, and beauty? So we would describe that in the Christian worldview as the unity of the goods. So the good, the true, and the beautiful. What are goodness, truth, and beauty to you? Why don't we start there? What do you think about those three things?
Nature.
What do you mean?
In a word, I feel like nature is reality. I feel like humans get lost in the fact that the world revolves around humans, but the world actually revolves around nature. I feel like humans think everything is determined. You know, I feel like especially in this day and age, I think we don't understand there's a lot we don't know about the universe, and there's a lot of things that could happen to the planet as a whole, especially here in the Northeast. I think we're very sheltered from the elements such as like tornadoes and earthquakes. I think nature is beautiful. I think the concept of life is beautiful. Living organisms
Why are those
beautiful.
things? Why are those things beautiful to you?
I think that's just where we stem from. And I think that's just where human beings originate from. And I think it goes back to very simple concepts. It goes back to very simple meanings. And I'm just kind of a fan of simple things. And I think you have to be happy with the simple things.
Oh, that's a really, I think, simple yet profound answer. And I think it checks out with reality, right? Because we have always, as people, we've always been drawn to nature as something that's beautiful. And I think there is a truth conveyed in nature because of its, people have always seen nature that is untouched by humans as something that is pristine. And I think that takes us back to, there's probably like a yearning for the Garden of Eden there, like pre-sin creation, where God has created nature and he's put man in nature, and there is something reminiscent about how the way things should be, that left untouched, nature operates the way it should, largely speaking. Obviously, you've got, from a Christian worldview, you've got sin that causes things like natural disasters to happen. We talk about living in a fallen world. So there are things as it stands where we feel as though the world, it does not act in a way that it should, for lack of a better term, right? Like it is better, and we would say in a perfect world, or in the Garden of Eden, there weren't tornadoes tearing through the place. So I think there's an element of that, like a yearning for simple goodness and truth. And we now live in a world that is very modern and technological that separates us from that nature. So what you say about the simplicity and the beauty of nature and human life, that's very profound, and it's absolutely true.
I think honesty is another one. I think honesty and collaboration is another, something else that I think would fit into that category. Because if you think about it, collaboration is really what makes human beings unique from other species. There's a reason dogs aren't building empires because they just can't collaborate like humans can. They don't have the language, they don't have the ability, they haven't developed per se into what humans can do. I think, if humans can be honest, respect each other's values, and collaborate and work together, I think that's beautiful as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely onto something there. And nature is honest too, right? Like nature isn't going to lie. Nature works. Biological processes work the way that they are meant to. Again, 99.9% of the time. So there is what I would affirm, and this sneaks over to the Christian worldview again, that things that are beautiful are also always containing truth or honesty. So like there's always going to be overlap between these three things. So the stuff that we affirm as being beautiful are also, they contain elements of truth, and things that are true we also generally affirm as being good.
Yeah, there's kind of like a Venn diagram effect there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. So what would you say, where were we going with this question? So goodness, truth, and beauty, where do you think, I think we talked about where they come from, right? Do you have any additional thoughts on that? You mentioned honesty. Is there anything else where, like, what is the origination, or what is the origin of goodness, truth, and beauty in your mind?
I still feel like it originates from nature. I feel like I go back to that first point I made. I just think that's where, like you said, if nothing else and everything stays still, nature will still function. And I think, I think there's a reason humans like to be outside. We evolved outside. And, if Earth is still here and human beings do become extinct one day, nature will still be there. And I think that's just where the world originated from.
So would you say that if human beings ceased to exist and the world still remained, would nature still continue to be beautiful?
It's a very good question. I don't know, because I'm answering from the mindset and the perception of a human being. So I think it's beautiful, but if, say, humans become extinct and some other species takes over the world in 2-3 billion years, they may not think it's beautiful. Maybe there is life outside of planet Earth and they come over and take over planet Earth. I don't know. Maybe they don't think it's beautiful and they just destroy all the trees. I have no idea.
But from the standpoint of human beings, right? I think that standard wouldn't change if humans are gone. Like I don't think the branches and the leaves of the tree that you view in the sunlight, or the waterfall that you sit on a rock and observe in the forest, those things don't change if a human being is not there to observe them.
I guess I was thinking of if there's no humans to observe them.
Okay, so you're talking about more like a tree. If a tree falls in the woods and no one is there to hear it, doesn't make a sound.
Perfect.
Yeah, yeah. No, so I mean, right? You raise an interesting point where, if you were to have like an alternate life form or an alternate humanity, like would they have the same standards of goodness, truth, and beauty? Like that could be debated, right? We see that now where different human beings, as they move farther from like accepted standards of natural law, we are now changing, I think wrongly, what our standards of what is good, true, and beautiful are. If you look at things like modern art, for example, right? Like those pieces of so-called art, like a spattering of paint on the wall, are not consonant with what were long held objective standards of beauty, for example. So I think I think you touch upon something that's true, but the nugget that I want to leave from the question that I asked is, I think like beauty would exist even in the absence of humans like present in that moment, because it points to something true.
Yeah, what's your take on this? What would you classify as truth, beauty?
So I would go back to, and this is a very similar answer to the answer that I gave earlier about human progression in heaven, that God is the ultimate source of goodness, truth, and beauty. And that links to the idea of intelligent design. So these things go hand in hand, and this is why it doesn't work with a purely materialist evolutionary worldview is, if you think of creation or nature as a work of art, right? You could affirm, or you could propose, that the Mona Lisa came into being because the right combination of paint and acrylic molecules hit the canvas in just the right order and at just the right time to form a series of colors and lines and shapes that we, as human beings, grown-up germs, now, because of the chemical reactions in our brains, find pleasing to our eyes. But if you take that point of view, you remove human beings, the Mona Lisa can no longer be beautiful, because like you were saying, well, you take an alternate life form or an alien, and now their chemical reactions in their brains may not find the Mona Lisa appealing to them. So that's the alternate worldview. So what I would think, and what I uphold as Christian teaching, is that goodness, truth, and beauty are objective because they originate from the ultimate embodiment of goodness, truth, and beauty, which is God himself. And because God himself, the embodiment of goodness, truth, and beauty, has designed our world that we live in our universe, everything around us that is, let's say, natural, that is consistent with those things, embodies the ideals of the Creator. So in much the same way that you have an artist who, he paints the Mona Lisa, or you have an artist that has a certain style and he puts his signature on the bottom of the painting, so too does creation have God's signature. Goodness, truth, and beauty, the unity of those goods, is God's signature in the created order that he has made. And so that's when I say all those things work together. That's why those things are constant, just as the same as like a beautiful work of art. It doesn't change when I leave the room and continues to be beautiful. The waterfall continues to be beautiful after I leave the earth. The sunlight would still continue to be beautiful after humans leave the planet, because they were created with an objective design that originates from God himself, who is the greatest of all goods. There is a Latin phrase that is used at, may or may not be correct in this, I think from Thomas Aquinas, who calls him the summum bonum, the greatest of all goods. And so there's a connection there with how he is the originator of those things, and he is also the ultimate destination of those things. So that's why he can't be exhausted. That's a long answer. Does that kind of make sense based on what you asked?
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. I like that answer. I respect that answer. I think that was a very good response.
Well, thanks. I guess I spend a lot of time thinking about these things, and it's also good because I'm the guy wearing the collars. So
yeah, and it's your podcast, so
#1 podcast in the world,
obviously.
Right? I mean, how does that that answer make sense to you, right? Does that
I think we were both kind of hitting along similar lines at the end of the day. I think yours revolved more around faith and mine didn't, but I think we were on the same road. We just broke off towards the end.
Yeah, I think I guess where I'm going is like, what is that at the end of the day? and this was Mark's last part to the question too. What does that make you think about goodness, truth, and beauty? Like, what is life worth living apart from those things? And like, what are we living for at the end of the day? Does it have to do with goodness, truth, and beauty, or can it exist apart from those things?
I think happiness is what we're living for. I think that's what everyone should strive to live for. And I think that looks very different in all shapes and sizes. I think there's a reason why some people make billions of dollars and are miserable, and some people that raise a family on $60,000 are extremely happy. I think happiness is something we can lose, and it's always something we can find. And it looks very different throughout different seasons of our lives. But we're only here for so many years. I live in the camp of we're all going to die eventually one day. Mark said several times, and this is something you may also agree with, that suffering is not something anyone can avoid in this life.
That's right.
Some people get that sooner in life. Some people get it later in life. Some people get it in the middle. Some people, it's an ongoing battle. But I think gratefulness, joy, happiness, I think if you can find that in day-to-day life and just enjoy the time you're here, I think as human beings, that's all you can ask for.
Would you, how would you classify happiness?
Well, I think that's the unique thing. It depends on the person. Some people, Jeff Bezos is going to have a very different view on happiness than I will. You know, Jeff Bezos, world domination. Maybe, maybe I don't know, want to make enough money to be financially independent. And it doesn't have to necessarily be in terms of finance either. That was just the example I used.
So if there are objective standards for goodness, truth, and beauty, would you also agree that there is an objective standard for happiness that can be universally applied?
No.
Why not?
Because I think it's unique on the person.
Well, so how about, maybe I'll word it a different way.
Okay.
Would you think that, because I would agree that on a surface level, people have different preferences of things that make them happy. Would you agree that there are principles underlying the things that make people happy or maximize? The word I would use is human flourishing. Like, would you think there are standard principles that underline the things that provide happiness that you're talking about?
I think there might be. I'm not 100% sure because I only can view and feel the world from my perspective. So I feel like, you know, maybe God is looking down at us and he has this answer and he understands how everyone thinks and feels and has this overarching answer. I do feel like while happiness is the meaning of life and we should really strive to be as happy as we possibly can while we're here, I also think there is a good amount. There is a very big part of human beings that have no idea on what makes us happy. You know, I think people that struggle with maybe alcoholism, they think another drink is going to make them happy, but it's not going to make them happy in the end. It's just going to send them down a very violent rabbit hole. So I really don't know, to be honest.
So I won't beat the dead horse too much, but I want to pull the thread a little bit further.
I was going to say, please, like, give your opinion by all means.
So would you? So you mentioned that everyone's goal in life is happiness, or like
that's what I think everyone should strive for. Yeah.
Everyone should strive for happiness. What of the person who chooses to be a serial killer and murdering other people makes him happy? What is your response to that?
That's a very good question. And I mean, I think happiness within reason, like, I think that is, you know, happiness within moral and ethical standards.
So I think that would affirm my initial question, which is there is a standard for what
Oh,
for
okay.
what would constitute like true happiness. Because I would also say, and maybe I'm wrong here, like the person who is abjectly and inherently evil in doing something like mass murder, for example, does not possess the same quality or even type of happiness that someone who is living a virtuous life feels.
Yeah, that's a good question.
So I would argue that there is an objective standard for that. So where was I going with that? So if there is an objective standard, or there are bounds within which we could call it true happiness reside, do you think you could, like, what comes to mind as like defining those boundaries for like true, we call it true happiness?
The first place my mind went to was reproduction. I feel, I don't know if I truly believe that's why we were put on this earth, to reproduce, but I mean, that's what species kind of do, reproduce.
And it's no coincidence that one of the first commands that God gave to Adam and Eve in the garden after he made them was to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So I think that absolutely is it, right? I think there are other things that provide happiness, which we'll get to in a minute, but human reproduction in the context of the family, I think you're spot on. I think there is a natural joy and fulfillment in that. And, I would say, and I think Mark would agree too, that with the big caveat, if you are able, you don't want to neglect or reject the opportunity and the responsibility to have children. Again, if you are able, right? But you totally, what I can see is you totally miss out on the fullness of love and joy in this life if you have the possibility of having children but reject it. So hear me say that it's a willful rejection and not a struggle with infertility or an inability to find a partner, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking about the willful rejection or denial of having children. That's an opportunity that that if you squander, you totally abandon that avenue of really deep joy and happiness. And I've heard it explained like having kids like totally increases your highs and your lows, where like when you're single or when you're married, like you might be plus or minus 5 or plus or minus 10 on the happiness scale. Those limits like totally leave. I've heard like when you have children, that your highs are like higher than you could ever imagine. And when something happens to your children, that it's the worst thing that could ever happen to you, but that it's totally worth it at the end of the day.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, I've read a lot too that people who don't have children, again, that have the option to and just reject that opportunity, as they get to later stages in their life, they normally regret it. I mean, it's easy for us sitting here now at almost 30 years old to be content with not having children because we still have, our youth. We still have, like, our bodies are still functioning, our minds still work well. But in our old age, when we're 80, it is nice to have our offspring always come around, always have a place to go, take care of us in our old age. I think it also plays into the what if factor. What if I had kids? What if I gave into this opportunity? I just think a lot of people will regret it as they get older if they choose not to have children.
I think it's unfortunate in that regard, but I also think there are other godly avenues for providing happiness as well. And I'm not negating the last point that we just made, but like in the interest of completing the argument, like is there something that sits underneath why having children makes us or gives us joy, and why that gives us so much purpose? Is there a connection there?
I think we just get to live on. Like, I think there is a spiritual aspect through it. We get to relive our aspects, relive our lives from a different perspective. And I think that's just interesting. You get to
Yeah.
have your genes move on to another generation, you know?
Well, there's absolutely the biological aspect of passing on your genetics and, in a sense, living on through your posterity. But and like historic Judaism, for example, places a great emphasis on genealogy and living on through one's children. Where I would insert myself, I guess, to close the loop as a priest, I would say that what you are getting at is there is a standard that undergirds, that supports the pursuit of human happiness and explains why children are one of the deepest embodiments of that. And that's goodness, truth, and beauty. Because if you take it from the standpoint of the artist and the artwork, the creator and the creation, not only is there an objective truth behind what makes a work of art or what makes nature beautiful, but would you agree that a piece of art is much better when it is hanging in a home or in an art studio when others can enjoy it?
Yeah, I would say so.
So following that logic, right? The being fruitful and multiplying and fill the earth is not just important because God said so, but because it is a fulfillment of the act of love, which fills the earth with fellow human beings, God's creation, in order to enjoy and worship God in the act of creation itself, such that like God has given us creation, the good, the true, and the beautiful. And I know I'm getting really deep here, but basically like it's connected because being fruitful and partaking in the act of procreation then multiplies the love which is expressed in the good, the true, and the beautiful. So what are we doing if not increasing our heritage and the number of people who, raised rightly, can also worship God through the appreciation and the right understanding of the good, the true, and the beautiful that he has provided? And if you need me to explain that, please do, because I'm working out this theory in real time.
I think I understand what you're saying, but I don't have much of a rebuttal.
No, that's fine. And I'm offering this as a conclusion, like food for thought for you and for us to kind of think about, because we're also I'm running out of questions to ask you, so I think we'll wrap it up soon. But I think I do want to flesh it out a bit further.
You definitely closed the loop. I definitely see how you made that come full circle.
Because it's basically like just as the intent of artwork is fulfilled in its rightful appreciation of what is beautiful about it and what is true about how the artist made it. God, his intention for our lives, for our creation, is to exist with him in love and worship for all eternity. And so the nature of love dictates that, we're not forced to against our will, but we are created with the seed of knowledge and free will to either accept or reject him. And by accepting him, we participate, we worship God in the fullness of his goodness, truth, and beauty. So that is the fulfillment of our purpose and the greatest good, again, of what we can find in this life and in the next, is in the rightful worship of God, who is goodness, truth, love, and beauty. And we perpetuate that. We we express faith in that being true by being obedient to his command to have children if and when we are able, because we are now creating, we are with God procreating a new generation to further multiply the appreciation of God himself and the canvas of his artwork, which is his creation. I'll stop there because I don't think I can put that another way.
I think that's beautifully said.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that's a great perspective, and I think a lot of Christians who watch this podcast will really appreciate it.
Well, I sure hope so, God willing. And, as with all of the things that we discuss, it's really not my words, and they're not ideas original to me. It's God through the Holy Spirit speaking in and through me and through us. So, I don't claim any credit for myself there. I do have one last question in conclusion, but I want to make sure that do you have any other thoughts or questions about what we've discussed, or any questions for me before we wrap things up?
I don't think so. I think you've kind of answered how you look at things and what you would respond to with those questions. And I think we've kind of gone through them pretty comprehensively and thoroughly.
I appreciate that. And I expressed this before. I really appreciate your perspective. And I know this is the first time we've had you on an episode, but you do so much behind the scenes, and Mark and I really appreciate, being able to go back and forth and shoot the breeze with you and ask what you think about this thing or the other thing. But last question for us here. What has this podcast meant to you? I think this is in the context of what we just discussed, right? You're a guy who, obviously a deep thinker, but not, at least not yet, I won't push you, right? But a confessing Christian. So you've come into this and you've worked with me and Mark from, I would say, an outsider's perspective. So keeping that in mind, I'm really interested to hear, what does working on this podcast mean to you, and how has working on this show with us caused you to think about things differently, or has it?
Well, I think the first thing it really means to me is I like both you guys a lot. I consider you guys both pretty good friends. So at the end of the day, I consider this just kind of going to hang out with two of my friends and kind of
Nice.
Chat, catch up. I feel like it's a safe environment where I can be open and honest about whatever's going on in my life, whether serious or not so serious, whether it's great or not great. I think, I just enjoy coming here. I look forward to it every month. It's exciting. In terms of what it's done for me from a Christian perspective, I mean, I really knew nothing about Christianity when I started doing this. And I guess in some ways I still don't, because a lot of the conversations like we've talked about, I'm more focused on producing the podcast as opposed to listening to it.
Which you do an excellent job, by the way. And for those who are watching, Josh is live changing the camera angles on OBS while we're having this conversation. So
yeah, so if I'm pausing a little bit, it's because
Yeah.
I'm changing the camera angles as I'm talking.
But anyway, not to cut you off there.
I don't know. I mean, I don't have much of a religious background. I wasn't raised to any specific religion, but I think it's interesting. I just enjoy hearing other people's perspective. And I think that's exactly what this has done, is it's just given me another perspective on the world. Everyone's social media algorithm is going to look a little bit different. Everyone's perception of the world is going to look a little bit different. And I feel like the more perceptions of the world that you can fit into your perspective, the better perspective you're going to have. So it's if you only read books about finance, you're only going to be knowledgeable about finance. But if you read books on finance, probability, business, religion, you're just going to have a better view of the world. You're going to understand more people, and you're going to understand how more people think. And I think that's just what this has done. It's really helped me understand how other people think.
Well, thank you for your kind words and your affection. I think what you just said there reveals a wisdom that is beyond your years in terms of seeking out a well-rounded understanding of the world. And I'm glad that you like Mark. That makes one of us. So he's got one fan
Out of everyone in the world.
out of everybody out there. And I, on behalf of myself, and I know Mark would say this same, would express a profound gratitude for your friendship over the last few years, and also all of the help that you've provided producing this show. We absolutely couldn't do what we're doing here today without you. So, I thank God for the opportunity to have connected and to continue to reconnect with you as a friend. And, I am grateful to hear that our relationship and the work that we're doing has had such a profound effect on you. And I pray, it is my prayer that it continues to do so, and that our viewers and listeners would also be likewise helped and impacted by the work that we're doing. And ultimately, we give all glory to God for that. So, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you sitting down to take the time to share this conversation. And, I've actually, as much as we've worked together and known each other for a long time, I've learned a lot about you today. And I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot about you today as well. Anything else you want to say for the number one podcast in the world today?
Thanks for having me. I like to think of myself as the most introverted extrovert there is. I like to joke around. I'm kind of the life of the party, but also when the party's over, I kind of disappear a little bit. I don't talk a lot about what I read and what I go through. So, thanks for having me on. It was nice to talk about it, and it was nice to hopefully educate some of our listeners about a different perspective.
Absolute pleasure, my friend. And I think having future conversations with you would be really interesting. So we'll have to see what happens. And hopefully, I think our viewers and listeners would agree. We would love to hear your perspective on things in future episodes. So thanks again. We look forward to doing that. And with that today, that will conclude this episode of the Lively Faith Podcast. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Again, a friendly reminder to like and subscribe if you haven't already. We cannot grow this ministry without your support and without God's grace. You can find more information at livelyfaithministries.org about all the great stuff we're doing. Thanks again once more for listening to the Lively Faith Podcast. I am the Reverend Nathan Stomberg. God bless.